Assalamualaikum everyone and a very good morning. Today we are going to start chapter number 4, which is titled as consumer behavior. And in today's class we'll be looking at different marks, we'll be comparing them and see how our brain works. And after that we'll be looking into the dynamics of perception. We'll be covering the elements of perception and the role in consumer behavior. We'll be understanding why consumers process only a small amount of information that they receive, and we'll be understanding how consumer organize consumption related information and why and how consumers add biases to stimuli and implications of this tendency for marketing. And we'll be looking into the consumer imagery and how products are positioned. And finally, we'll be covering the perceived risk and how consumer they handle and reduce these risks. So before we start the chapter, before we start defining the perception, let's look into these different pictures and see how these pictures they actually work, how our brain actually process this information. So here the question is whether the center circle are same in the size. So apparently when we look at it, we find that the circles, they seem different. The first circle, center circle, seems much bigger as compared to the circle in the which is surrounded by the large circles. That seems a bit small. But in fact, in reality, if you'll measure the size of both the circles, you'll find that both the circles are of the same size. So what this depicts? It depicts that how we are perceiving information, how we are processing this information because of the placement of this surrounding elements can change our perception regarding the center element. Now, this is Zulner illusion, and it is like whether the lengthy lines are parallel. So if you look at these lines, these lengthy lines do not seem parallel to one another, whereas in reality these lines are perfectly parallel. It's only because the small lines on these lengthy lines, they have different directions. That's why it's changed our perception regarding these lengthy lines as well. Finally, the Muller-Ayer illusion. So the question is, tell me which one is the lengthy. So if I look at both the lines, the line B seems smaller as compared to line A, whereas in reality both the lines are of the same size. It's just the direction of the arrows that are attached to these lines that the line B seems much smaller as compared to line A. So this basically gives a huge opportunity. It means that the perceptions can be changed regarding things by changing certain things around those prime element. We can change certain things, and that can make a huge impact regarding how things will be perceived. So for marketers, it is basically a great opportunity to change people's perception towards their products, services, and brands. So finally, a very small and interesting activity. Please write a short story seeing this picture. What do you get out of this picture? Just write it down and share with me. Okay. Now let's move towards the perception. So what we need to understand that two individuals, they may be exposed to the same stimuli, but how each person recognizes that event, how they select the information, how they organize that information, and how they interpret the event. This is actually a highly individual process, and it's based on the person's own needs, values, and expectations. So no two person are perceiving the same event in the same way. The perception is going to be different, and it is basically dependent upon their needs, values, and expectations. They may have a very different social learning. That's why they're interpreting it differently. They may have very different education, learning, or previous experiences. Based on those experiences, they are interpreting. They might be interpreting the event based on that. So finally, we'll be defining perception as a process by which individuals select, organize, and interpret stimuli into a meaningful and coherent picture of the world. And now consumers, they act and react on the basis of perceptions, not on the basis of reality. Why they're buying certain products, why they're not buying certain products, definitely perception plays a great part in that. And for each individual, reality is totally a personal phenomena based on the person needs, wants, values, and personal experiences. So we need to understand that this phenomena of perception is quite subjective, and the perception changes from person to person. So thus for the marketers, consumer perceptions are much more important than the knowledge of objective reality. So it's marketers must look into the reasons why consumers differ and how this difference is going to affect their perceptions towards their product and services. For if one thinks about it, it's not what actually is so, but what consumer think is so. That affects their actions and their buying habits. So it's not about the reality, it's more about how people are perceiving that reality and how they're interpreting that reality. So marketers must look into all these facts. Now let's discuss the sensory inputs. Now, when we are talking about sensory input, we are talking about basically that there are certain stimuli in our environment, and most of the time we get exposed to these stimuli, and we as human beings feel sensation. So, sensation is basically the immediate and direct response of the sensory organs to stimuli. So, whenever we are exposed to the stimuli in our environment, our body automatically respond to it. Why? Because we have certain sensory receptors. We have eyes, we have ears, we have nose, mouth, and skin. So what our eyes are doing, it's basically we're getting sight through our eyes, through our ears we can hear, and our nose helps us to smell things, our mouth helps us to taste things, and finally our skin helps us to feel uh, anything like temperature change or any pain, because all the neurons, sensory neurons are here, and through that we can have all those sensations. Now, what is stimulus? Stimulus is any unit of input to any of the senses. So when we are, for example, walking around in a shopping mall, we come across many different products. There are variety of different products, or versions of product within the same product category. And then we see that these products, they are packed in different packaging, and they have different brand names. There may be many in-store advertisements displays. There may be in form of Panaflexes and small flags in the store. And we come across many commercials on TV of the same product. So here what we need to understand that uh, all these things, when we come across all these things, these are basically the stimuli, and uh, our sensory receptors, their sensory functions are to see, hear, smell, taste, and touch. And all of these functions basically they came into play when they're exposed to any of this stimuli. So now what we do is like we look at those things, our eyes are working. Maybe there is certain in commercial there is voice, so we hear that voice. And at times companies, what they do, they display their products and they even let you try the product, so you can smell the products. You can especially for fragrances, and then for food, then you can taste food, and then it's basically you can take the feel of the product. For example, if you have a razor, you can basically get the feel of the product as well. So now, human sensory sensitivity refers to the experience of sensation, and sensitivity to stimuli varies with the quality of an individual's sensory receptors. So it means, see, many people, they have very sharp senses of hearing. Many, they are very good at good eyesight. They can clearly see the visuals around them. So now what we need to understand that it's about the quality of individual sensory receptors and the amount of the intensity of the stimuli and to which he or she is exposed. So for example, we need to understand, see, I've seen this, I've witnessed this, that blind individuals, their senses of hearing are more developed because the thing or the work that they have to do with their eyes, they're also doing it with their ears. So this is all about this sensory input. So now let's talk about the absolute threshold. And this absolute threshold is basically a place where you start feeling or start having the sensation, or you start feeling the difference between the two different intensity of the same stimuli. So the lowest level at which an individual can experience a sensation, that is actually known as this absolute threshold. And it is like detecting the difference between something and nothing. So you're in a room and you're already adapted to the room temperature, but certainly you start feeling cold. So the difference in the temperature, the point where you start feeling the difference, that is basically the absolute threshold. Or while you're traveling on a road and there's a billboard, so at a distance where you just start noticing that uh, uh, billboard, that is the point which is known as the absolute threshold. So in marketing it is very important because we want to get noticed by the consumer. So we need to understand that if we are designing a packaging, we are changing a packaging, or you're changing certain elements in the brand, we have to keep this in our mind that the difference should be noticeable by the consumers. Now let's talk about the sensory adaptation. It is getting used to certain sensations, and that is being accommodated to certain level of stimulation and becoming less able to notice a particular stimuli. So this is very important. See, we need to understand that you may come up with a very exciting advertisement or a very exciting packaging, but after a year, 2 year, 3 year, 4 year, what will happen? Sensory adaptation will take place. Our senses will get used to it. So then we need to revitalize our packaging, or we have need to become more creative. It's like constantly marketers must update their marketing materials, their packaging, their uh, colors, and all that. Now, ambush marketing. Now, when we are talking about ambush marketing, it consists of placing ads in places where consumers, they hardly expect to see these ads and they cannot readily avoid it. So because, for example, if you're going in a washroom and you come across an ad which is placed on the flip of that um, commode, what will happen? You definitely cannot avoid it. Or if you're sitting on a bench in a park and that is basically the ad is endorsed on that bench, you cannot avoid that. So marketers, they try to find those places where they can keep these ads and they cannot be avoided by the consumers.